Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
Puer natus est nobis, a child is born to us today. Today, Friday, December 25th, is the Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ. And these are today's headlines. Pope Francis prays for peace throughout the world in his Christmas Urbi et Orbi blessing and Christmas message. The United Nations is helping food aid reach more than 3 million people in Syria. And in a Christmas message, the International Director of Jesuit Relief Services speaks about the meaning of Christmas. For Vatican News, I'm Christopher Wells.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buon Natale. Vorrei far giungere a tutti il messaggio che la Chiesa annuncia in questa festa, con le parole del profeta Isaia. Un bambino è nato per noi, ci è stato dato un figlio.
Dear brothers and sisters, Merry Christmas, says Pope Francis. I'd like to bring to everyone the message that the Church proclaims on this feast with the words of the prophet Isaiah. To us a child is born, to us a son is given. Pope Francis gave his traditional Christmas message and blessing Urbi et Orbi to the city of Rome and to the world, offering words of hope and consolation, saying a birth is always a source of hope, and this child, Jesus, was born to us, without any borders, privileges, or exclusions. The Pope pronounced his message in the Hall of Benediction of St. Peter's Basilica, the upper area just behind the central loggia, where he would normally have delivered his message. The pandemic and safety measures in place led the decision to avoid the risk of large public gatherings in St. Peter's Square, and hence to broadcast live his message from inside the Basilica. The theme of the Pope's Christmas message showed how Jesus was born for everyone, the Son that God has given to the entire human family. Thaddeus Jones tells us more.
In his Christmas message, the Pope underscored that thanks to the Christ child, we can all call one another brothers and sisters, even as we hail from every continent, every language and culture, with our own identities and differences. He said this fundamental reality is something we can all build on to address the monumental challenges we are facing at this moment in history, such as the ecological crisis and serious economic and social imbalances worsened by the coronavirus pandemic. The unity we need and seek as brothers and sisters, God has made possible, the Pope said, by giving us His Son, Jesus, a fraternity that is grounded in genuine love. The Pope prayed that the child of Bethlehem might help us open our hearts to help the vulnerable, the sick, those unemployed and affected by the pandemic, as well as women who have suffered domestic violence during the lockdowns. He also called for a spirit of international cooperation, starting with healthcare to ensure all will have access to vaccines and treatment.
In ciascuno vedo del riflesso il volto di Dio e in quanti soffrono scorgo il Signore che chiede il mio aiuto.
The Pope said, in everyone I see reflected the face of God and those who suffer. I see the Lord pleading for my help. I see Him in the sick, the poor, the unemployed, the marginalized, the migrant, and the refugee. Looking at the lights and shadows in our world, the Pope offered his prayers and encouraged all people to offer theirs to remember the many children worldwide who are victims of war, especially in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. He called on courageous efforts to work for peace there and throughout the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, and that the infant Jesus might heal the wounds of the beloved Syrian people and bring comfort to Iraqis and those working for reconciliation, recalling especially the Yazidis who have suffered greatly. He prayed that peace may take root in Libya and that Israelis and Palestinians might regain mutual trust to continue dialogue to overcome grievances. He encouraged the Lebanese to keep hope alive and for leaders to work for reform so that the country can persevere in its vocation of freedom and peaceful coexistence. Looking at other areas of the world, he prayed that the international community be supported in efforts to continue the ceasefire in Nagorno-Karabakh and eastern Ukraine. And in areas where armed conflicts and humanitarian crises persist, he remembered Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Ethiopia, Mozambique, South Sudan, Nigeria, and Cameroon, and for their suffering to finally end. The Pope remembered the American continent, especially affected by the coronavirus pandemic, and for a calming of tensions in Chile and Venezuela. He recalled the victims of natural disasters, especially in the Philippines and Vietnam, and he noted the suffering of the Rohingya people and that they might find respite and hope. Despite the great difficulties we are facing, the Pope noted that the Christ child tells us that pain and evil are not the final word.
Egli ci annunzia che il dolore e il male non sono l'ultima parola.
In conclusion, Pope Francis recalled families who are unable to unite today due to the pandemic. He prayed that Christmas might help us rediscover the family as a cradle of life and faith, a place of acceptance and love, dialogue, forgiveness, and a source of peace for all humanity. Wishing all a Merry Christmas, he then gave his Urbi et Orbi blessing.
And thanks to Thaddeus Jones for that report on the Pope's Urbi et Orbi blessing and the Christmas address of Pope Francis. Syria has been suffering from a humanitarian crisis for the past decade. The United Nations is currently helping food aid to reach almost 3 million needy people. With an update on the situation in the Middle East, here's Nathan Morley.
It's been another bleak year in Syria. The United Nations say millions of people have been left displaced, impoverished, traumatized, and suffering from personal loss. To make matters worse, a dwindling economy, the coronavirus, rising food insecurity and malnutrition are causing the overall number of people in need to soar. Subsidized bread and gasoline is currently in short supply in Syria, despite both having doubled in price since last September. On a positive note, food distribution is underway to reach more than 3 million of the neediest people. The United Nations has stressed the need for a nationwide ceasefire, substantive constitutional drafting, and a wider effort to address the full range of issues, with actions to build confidence and movement. The picture is also bleak in neighbouring Iraq, where the World Bank expects poverty to rise sharply as its oil-dependent economy continues to shrink. The country is currently in talks with the IMF for urgent support. But as Iraq relies on imports, weakening the dinar is likely to spark inflation in the country. Prices have so far remained low, partly because of Iraq's two biggest trade partners, Iran and Turkey, have had their own currency depreciations. Further erosion of living conditions is a potentially unpopular side effect for the government, which took office after mass protests toppled the previous administration. For Vatican News, this is Nathan Morley reporting.
With Italy under a new lockdown for the holidays, Pope Francis celebrated Christmas Mass during the night in a near-empty St. Peter's Basilica on Thursday evening. Millions of people were able to follow the ceremony through radio, television, and the various means of social communications. In his homily, Pope Francis said, "The birth of Jesus is the newness that enables us to be reborn each year and to find in him the strength needed to face every trial." Devin Watkins has that story.
In his homily at Christmas Midnight Mass, Pope Francis said Jesus' birth is for us, and he noted how often the word "for" appears on this holy night.
Ma che cosa vuole dirci questo per noi?
Yet what do these words "for us" really mean, the Pope asked?
Che il Figlio di Dio, il benedetto per natura, viene a farci figli benedetti per grazia.
They mean, he said, that the Son of God, the one who is holy by nature, came to make us, God's children, holy by grace. This is a magnificent gift, he said, one that is pure grace and does not depend on anything we can do, but solely on God's love for us. God's gift to us on Christmas is not merely a thing or an object. Instead, Pope Francis said, God gave his only begotten Son, who is all his joy. And yet the Pope continued, our own ingratitude toward God and our injustice towards so many of our brothers and sisters can make us wonder if God was right in giving us this gift of his Son. But he said, it is only out of God's unchanging love that changes us that leads God to give us his Son. It is because of God's infinite love for us that Jesus was born not in a palace, but in the manger of a stable. This is a sign, he said, to guide us through life. In Bethlehem, God lies in a manger as if to remind us that in order to live, we need him, like the bread we eat. Pope Francis insisted that the manger, poor in everything yet rich in love, teaches us that true nourishment comes from letting ourselves be loved by God and loving others in turn. God came to us at Christmas as a weak and vulnerable child to teach us how to love, the Pope said.
Dio prende dimora vicino a noi, povero e bisognoso, per dirci che servendo i poveri ameremo Lui.
God came among us in poverty and need to tell us that in serving the poor, we will show our love for Him. I'm Devin Watkins.
Finally, each year during the Advent season, Christian leaders and organizations around the world send Christmas greetings to Vatican Radio listeners. In this unprecedented year, gripped by a global pandemic, our contributors are highlighting not just the importance of this holiday season, but also how lasting peace and goodwill can be fostered in today's world. Today's message comes to us from Father Tom Smolich, International Director of Jesuit Relief Services.
This year has not been easy. Since Father Pedro Rupe founded JRS in 1980, we have sought to be God's hands in the world, accompanying, serving, and advocating for refugees and other forcibly displaced people. We are present in 56 countries and serving over 800,000 people in need. COVID-19 confronted us with significant challenges. It also triggered an unprecedented demand for innovative solutions. And we were able to adjust our work and ensure that the most vulnerable were not left behind. And yet in the midst of all this, in the midst of a global pandemic, there is much reason for hope. Our work with refugees over the last 40 years, and particularly this year, has shown us that human ingenuity and resilience is capable of extraordinary things in the face of adversity. Refugees have told us that they have been through far worse than COVID, and their stories of suffering and injustice can be shattering. Yet these women and men are often filled with more hope than I could ever imagine. If we stand hand in hand as a global community and care for the most vulnerable, we will have the power to create a new, more compassionate next normal in 2021. Pope Francis sent us a letter for our 40th anniversary this year, and he reminded us that yours is the vital task of extending the hand of friendship to those who are lonely, separated from their families, or even abandoned, accompanying them and giving them a voice. I have no hands but yours. We have no hands but each other's. I wish all viewers blessings of health and hope this Christmas season and into the new normal, the next normal of 2021.
And thank you for Tom Smolich of the Jesuit Relief Service. He's the International Director of JRS for that Christmas message. And that brings us to the end of this Christmas Day edition of Vatican and World News. I'm Christopher Wells, and from all of us here at Vatican Radio and the Dicastery for Communication, a very happy Christmas season and a blessed New Year. Laudetur Jesus Christus.